Imagine spending years mastering your craft, perfecting every line, every detail, every calculation, only to watch your work get rejected in seconds. Now, imagine that rejection becoming the unexpected beginning of a global engineering revolution. This is the unbelievable story of how a Filipino engineer, dismissed in a Dubai boardroom, ended up shocking the entire construction world. And trust me, what happened next will challenge everything you think you know about talent, innovation, and the power of not giving up. Today, we uncover the truth behind the blueprint Dubai rejected and how it turned into one of the most groundbreaking engineering moments of our time. So sit back, because this story will stay with you long after the documentary ends. Our journey begins in one of the fastest-growing cities on Earth, Dubai, a place where skyscrapers rise like giants from the desert, where engineering dreams turn into billion-dollar realities, and where the competition is fierce. Every project is a race. Every design is a battle. Every blueprint must prove its worth. In the middle of this competitive arena stood a Filipino engineer named Marco Dela Cruz, a quiet yet brilliant mind who had worked behind the scenes for years. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, he wasn't from a famous university, but he carried something many overlooked: creativity, persistence, and a deep passion for solving impossible engineering problems. Marco had been part of multiple projects in Dubai, but this time he was invited to present his own blueprint, a revolutionary design for a mid-high tower that could withstand extreme temperatures, reduce energy consumption by 40%, and use sustainable materials without raising costs. For many engineers, this kind of innovation would be a lifetime achievement. But Marco believed it was only the beginning. When the presentation day arrived, the boardroom was filled with top engineers from different countries. As Marco walked in with his rolled blueprint, he felt their eyes on him, not hostile but doubtful, like he didn't belong in a room of international elites. Marco opened his design and began explaining the airflow system, the temperature-resistant foundation, and the new hybrid insulation he had developed. Some looked surprised, some whispered. Some leaned closer in interest. But one senior engineer, a highly respected figure in Dubai's construction world, didn't look impressed at all. Before Marco could even finish his explanation, the man interrupted him. "This will never work here. Dubai doesn't experiment with untested ideas." The room went silent. Marco tried to defend his concept, pointing out that he had run simulations, built models, and tested stress behaviors. But the senior engineer shook his head. "We reject this blueprint," he said, just like that. Rejected. Dismissed. Ignored. Not because it lacked value, but because it didn't come from someone they considered important. Marco rolled up his blueprint, thanked the panel, and walked out quietly. But what nobody knew at that moment is that the blueprint was far more brilliant than they realized. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A sudden heat wave hit Dubai. Temperatures on construction sites reached dangerous levels. Several ongoing projects experienced material stress, thermal expansion issues, and unexpected micro-cracks. Engineers rushed to troubleshoot. Millions of dollars were at risk. And guess whose simulation had predicted this exact scenario? Yes, Marco's. His hybrid insulation system and desert flow ventilation had been designed specifically for extreme heat anomalies. Word began spreading among mid-level engineers who had seen his presentation. They started contacting Marco privately, asking about his methods. Some requested copies of his analysis. Others wanted him to run independent calculations for their projects. In just 2 weeks, Marco went from rejected to in demand. But the real twist came when one of Dubai's largest construction companies faced a major crisis. Their project, a 52-story commercial tower, was experiencing heat-related expansion far beyond acceptable safety margins. Rebuilding the foundation would cost millions. Adjusting the structure might take years. Delaying the project would destroy investor confidence. No solution seemed possible until someone remembered the Filipino engineer whose blueprint had been dismissed. Marco was called in, not as a junior consultant, but as the lead problem solver. He reanalyzed the project and suggested a modification to the airflow channels, almost identical to what he had designed in his rejected blueprint. He proposed adding a passive cooling layer using materials that were cheap, accessible, and already approved in Dubai's building code. The executives doubted him, but their situation was desperate. They gave him one chance. Marco and a team worked tirelessly, recalculating loads, adjusting material thickness, and redesigning external shading angles. After long days and nights, the modifications were implemented, and the results were unbelievable. Temperatures inside the structural core dropped significantly. Thermal expansion stabilized. The micro cracks stopped spreading. The project was saved. The board of engineers who once dismissed Marco now wanted to meet him again, this time not to reject his ideas, but to understand how they had underestimated him so badly. Marco walked into the same boardroom as before, but something had changed. The room was silent. The doubting faces looked humbled, and the senior engineer who rejected him stood up and said, "We were wrong. Your blueprint wasn't just valid. It was ahead of its time." Marco's rejected idea became the new reference model for heat-resistant structures in desert environments. It was studied, published, and adopted by multiple engineering firms in the Middle East. Suddenly, the Filipino engineer who had been overlooked became a symbol of innovation. But the story didn't end there. Engineers from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and even Africa began reaching out, asking Marco to lecture about sustainable desert-proof designs. Students from the Philippines watched his interviews and felt inspired. Many said they finally believed that Filipino engineers could compete globally, not because of nationality, but because of skill, creativity, and resilience. Marco used his rising reputation not to brag, but to empower. He created a small program to mentor young Filipino engineers working overseas, helping them improve their presentations, build confidence, and believe in their own ideas. "If my blueprint was rejected," he once said, "it wasn't my failure. It was their failure to see what I saw." And that quote became famous. It spread across engineering forums, motivational pages, and overseas Filipino communities. But the story had one final twist. The blueprint Dubai rejected eventually became the foundation for a new skyscraper built in another Middle Eastern city that embraced innovation. The structure became known for its low energy consumption, extreme temperature resilience, and record-breaking efficiency. Tourists took pictures, experts studied the airflow system, and when journalists asked where the idea came from, Marco simply said, "It came from a moment everyone thought was a mistake." Today, his blueprint is taught in engineering classes discussing sustainable desert architecture. His name appears in innovation conferences and construction documentaries. And Dubai, the very place that once rejected him, now invites him as a keynote speaker for major engineering events. Marco's journey teaches us something powerful. Sometimes rejection is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of something much bigger. Talent doesn't need permission. Innovation does not need approval. A great idea will eventually find its place, no matter how many doors close. This is the story of how a Filipino engineer shocked the construction world, not by fighting for validation, but by proving that brilliance can come from anywhere. And if there's one lesson we take from this, it's simple. Never underestimate the idea someone brings into the room, because the blueprint you reject today might be the breakthrough the world celebrates tomorrow. And just like that, Marco's once dismissed masterpiece became a symbol of hope and a reminder that no dream is too small, no nationality is too humble, and no rejection is final. This is the legacy of the blueprint Dubai rejected, until a Filipino engineer changed everything.